Good evening and welcome to Athens City Council. It's Monday, November 1st, 2021 at 7 p.m. and we're in regular session tonight. Our first item of business is to establish a quorum, and now all members of council are present. So, thank you. Our next item of business is communications. And do we have communications from any council members? Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, President Isley. I'd just like to announce that the Environment and Sustainability Commission will meet this Wednesday, November 3rd, in this very room at 7 p.m. 6 p.m. And there is a sustainability film series showing at 7 p.m. that same night. So you can kind of double dip and get all your sustainability in one night. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any other communications from council members? If not, we'll move on to reports and communications from other elected officials. Law Director Eliason.
No.
Auditor Hecht.
No report.
Mayor Patterson.
No report.
Okay, we'll move on. We have lots of ordinances to read tonight. Our ordinances for third reading. 10821 is an ordinance authorizing the disposal of a mower in the Recreation Department, no longer needed for a municipal purpose, and is introduced by Councilmember Grace.
Thank you, President Isley. This is an ordinance that we have talked about a few times. It's very straightforward. It is just authorizing our city to dispose of a mower no longer in use. And I'd like to make a motion for approval. Second.
Okay, we have a motion and second for approval of 10821. Do we have any questions or comments from council members, from elected officials, administration, or anybody in the audience? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries and the ordinance is approved. 10921 is an ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into a master equity lease agreement amendment to said agreement, a maintenance agreement, and a government credit application with Enterprise Fleet Management. And this is introduced by Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, President Isley. I'd like to make a motion to amend 10921.
Second.
Thank you, Member Fall. The reason being that we would like to add an emergency clause to this ordinance. And also the law director has some recommended changes to the ordinance language. Shall I go ahead and present those changes now?
You could, yes, now that we have the motion and second.
Okay. So we would like to add the word affirming to the title and in the body of the ordinance. So the ordinance would read, an ordinance affirming the Service Safety Director's authorization to enter into a master equity lease agreement, amendment to said agreement, and then add the language separate lease agreements to the title. And at the end of the title to add and declaring an emergency. And then this language continues in the body of the ordinance. In section 1, we'd like to add an ordinance affirming the Service Safety Director's authorization. And then we'd also like to add separate lease agreements, as in the title in section 1. And then in section 2, we'd like to add the following. The Service Safety Director is further authorized to expend said funds for separate lease agreements entered into this year from the 2022 appropriation ordinance. And then finally, section 3 would be added. This ordinance shall be an emergency measure necessary for the preservation of the health, welfare, and safety of the residents of the city of Athens, Ohio, and that there are national vehicle supply issues due to the pandemic, and the city's aging vehicle fleet needs to be addressed quickly in order to continue to provide for the efficient delivery of services. And it shall be in full force and effect upon its passage and approval by the mayor. Those are all of the amendments to the ordinance.
Okay. And we have a motion and second. Are there any questions? Yes, Councilmember Smedley.
Thank you, President Isley. Can we just elaborate a little bit on why those changes were being suggested? Like, we're essentially removing authorizing with affirming, is that correct? Is that the switch out? What's the difference, I guess, in some of these changes?
Well, we added affirming to the title, and then we removed is hereby authorized, and changed the language to this is an ordinance affirming that the Service Safety Director that the Service Safety Director's authorization. This is language recommended by the Law Director. I don't know if the Law Director wants to speak to these specific
We're affirming the
changes.
fact that the Service Safety Director did sign the master equity lease agreement. That didn't really obligate the city to anything in particular, except that when we enter into individual leases, each of those leases will be subject to the master equity agreement. So he signed it, we're saying we're affirming
I see.
his signing.
I see. Thank you, I appreciate that.
And
Any? Yes, go ahead.
Shall I provide more information for Member Smedley?
No, that answers
Oh,
the
that answers your only question?
Yeah, thank
Okay,
you.
that's fine.
Any other questions or comments? From council members, elected officials, members of the audience? All right. So what we're voting on now is the amended language to 10921. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Thank you. The motion carries. The ordinance has been amended and read for the first time. 11021 is an ordinance amending the 2021 appropriation ordinance and authorizing the auditor to make interfund transfers. And this is introduced by Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, President Nisley. I'd like to make a motion to approve 11021.
Second.
Thank you, Member Fall. I have some things in the wrong order here. Hold on a minute. Okay, as discussed at first two readings and in committee, this appropriation ordinance includes some money for from the American Rescue Plan Act Fund, and we are placing that money into our APR Fund 286 for transfer and use, two different amounts of $150,000. This appropriation ordinance also includes $35,000 to create the remote work system as per ordinance 8621 this summer. It includes $90,000 to the general fund for the 2021 Outdoor Recreation Council of Appalachia membership dues. It includes $13,750 for a refund to the state of Ohio for a court community corrections grant that was not used. And then it also includes $2,800 for meter replacements in the parking garage. Thank you, President Nisley.
Okay. We have a motion and second for approval of this ordinance. Are there any questions or comments from council members, elected officials, or our audience members? Seeing none, we'll have the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries and the ordinance is approved. Ordinance 11121 is an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into or to extend the agreement with the Board of Athens County Commissioners for the purpose of obtaining the services of the Public Defender's Office through December 31st, 2022, and is introduced by Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, President Nisley. I'd like to make a motion to approve 11121.
Second.
Thank you, Member Smedley. This is annual business, as the title explains, to authorize the mayor to work or to extend our agreement with the commissioners for the services of the Public Defender's Office. Thank you, President Nisley.
Okay, we have a motion and second for approval of 11121. Any questions or comments from council members, elected officials, or members of the audience? If none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries and the ordinance is approved. Ordinance 11221 is an ordinance providing for the issuance of $400,000 of notes by the City of Athens, Ohio, in anticipation of the issuance of bonds for the purpose of renewing notes previously issued, for the purpose of paying part of the costs of acquiring a new fire truck and related equipment, and declaring an emergency. Introduced by Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, President Nyes. I'd like to make a motion to approve 11221.
Second.
Thank you, Member Fall. This is part of our budget process, and we need to pay our bills and arrange to reissue our notes in order to pay our bills for this fire truck. Thank you, President Nyes.
Okay. We have a motion and second for approval. Any questions or comments from council members, elected officials, members of our audience? Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries and the ordinance is approved. We'll now move on to ordinances for second reading. And I will read the title. We do have a few of these that we will be amending tonight, so there'll be some discussion. And I do believe that we have a few people from our audience who are here tonight to speak to the various ordinances, and we will allow time for that as well. 10321 is an ordinance amending Ordinance 10321, authorizing the 2021 street paving and repairs project number 337. And if no questions or comments, then we'll move on to Ordinance 11321. This is an ordinance amending certain sections of Athens City Code Title 7, Traffic Code, Chapter 7.04, Chapter 7.05, Parking Regulations, and this is introduced by Councilmember Reisner.
Madam President, I'd like to make a motion to amend 11321.
Second.
The reason for the amendment is to add this section into the proposed ordinance. It would read Section 7.09.99L, penalties needed to be amended to add, any person who wishes to appeal the violation shall visit the Athens Police Department within 120 hours of issuance of the initial citation and receive a minor misdemeanor citation into court, providing notice and an opportunity to be heard, which shall serve as an appeal process. That's it.
Okay, so we have a motion and second for amending this ordinance. And do we have any questions or comments, any discussion from our council members? Okay, and is this the one that, where we have somebody that's wanting to speak on this?
Correct. Should we vote on the amendment first, or?
Okay. So if this is, maybe it's another one that he's wanting to speak to.
No, 113
113
is who we have
is.
somebody here
Okay,
to speak.
all right. And I think that we can, Law Director Eliason, we can allow for the discussion before we take the vote.
Yes.
Correct. So we can. And Mr. Gerton, were you wanting to?
I wanted to talk about the motorcycle parking permit. Is this part of it? Okay. I guess my
Yes, if you'll come up
Okay.
and you'll give us your name, your address, and whether or not you represent any group.
my name is Sam Girton, spelled Girton, and I live at 20 Elmwood Place, and I'm not representing a group.
Okay.
So my understanding is City Council is considering changing the amount of money that you have to pay for a parking permit for a motorcycle. And I would just ask you guys to give some consideration to some of the factors that you may not be considering, in that if you elevate the price of the parking pass for the motorcycle, you're discouraging people from riding motorcycles. And I think with the parking problem that Athens has during peak times, it might be wise to encourage people to be riding motorcycles instead of driving cars that would contribute to the parking problem. The other consideration that you should think about as you elevate the price of the parking permit for motorcycles is that if you raise the price so much, the people who ride motorcycles will just make the decision to put quarters in a meter for the 3 months of the year that they ride the motorcycle instead of buying the pass for the entire year. So I kind of see it as two things happening. A parking problem that could be aided by encouraging people to ride motorcycles. And the other thing is an environmental issue, which fuel efficiency on a motorcycle is much better than it is in a standard car. So I would even go to an extreme and say maybe you could consider eliminating the motorcycle parking fee to encourage more people to ride motorcycles and have Athens viewed as a greener town and a motorcycle-friendly town. And so I just came in tonight to have you guys consider those as you're casting your vote, and I would encourage you to consider voting against raising the parking permit fee.
Okay. Thank you for your comments.
Sure.
So what we're doing tonight is amending it, and by amending it, it will be going back to the first reading. So we're not voting on it tonight for approval or not to approve. Are there any other comments or questions on the amendment? Yes, Councilmember McCary.
I think just based on that, it would be helpful to provide a quick summary explanation for the reason for the increase, if we could.
And to the best of my knowledge, the only information I have right now is that many of these fees were reviewed by the code director's office and other departments throughout the city, trying to take a look at the actual administrative costs for these, and they felt that, they also explained that some of the fees had not been updated for a long time. We can verify the particular information. It's a good point. We can verify the particular information for the motorcycle fee and when was the last time that was increased. That would be helpful, Mayor
Okay.
Patterson, if we could have that. And any other information from Code Director Riggs. Okay. All right. If no other questions or comments, thank you. We're ready to vote now. All those in favor of the proposed amendment to 11321, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ordinance has been amended and is read now for the first time. Ordinance 11421 is an ordinance amending Athens City Code Title 11, Business Regulations, Chapter 11.04, Vending, Peddling, and Soliciting, Section 11.04.03, Regulation of Vendors, Peddlers, and Solicitors, Penalties. And this is introduced by Councilmember Reisner. And I don't believe we have any amendments tonight, but I do
No.
believe we have some people who are interested
That's why I understand.
in speaking. And that I was keeping track informally up here for the 3 minutes. You can come to the podium, as the previous speaker did, list your name and address and whether or not you're representing a particular group. I do set the timer for 3 minutes. And there's a little light indicator on the podium so that when your time starts to run out, it'll let you know.
So my name is James Wonky, 55 North Court Street. I showed up today because Jeffrey Reisner, Steve Patterson, and Lisa Eliason are leading an attempt to raise penalties on small vendors in the devastating aftermath of COVID-19. I'm not sure why Steve or Lisa are hiding their involvement or why Jeffrey Reisner lied to a Post reporter about the motivation behind this change, probably because they know how unpopular it is. All because in desperation, I decided to set up my food truck outside my family business with the relative consent of my neighbors and the explicit consent of my landlord, which I say is a victimless crime. It's clear the community in this part of Athens doesn't have any issue with this, and I would question the money motivations of anyone who does. It's not any politician's job to protect other businesses from competition, and there is no reason to keep food trucks from vending near North Court Street at night when parking is free. In fact, my family is offering to willingly put nighttime vending spots in front of our store. This would actually help people, but the change you're supporting isn't good for anybody. It's not good for small business, not good for local business, not good for Athens citizens, not good for working class Americans. We have more abandoned taxi spots than usable vendor locations, and EV chargers so rich people can charge their Teslas while I drag a generator around town to meet health requirements. I'm so glad barely anybody gets to have stupid parklets a couple months out of the year. These are all just token changes. Are they supposed to make up for the hardship my industry endured through COVID? City Council changed the rules on uptown parking so the richest man in town could build another bar in his parking lot. Why cut deals for the rich and powerful but not local business? You could do better, but instead you're criminalizing me and my employees because we dared to do what was necessary to survive. I'm risking everything to make sure my employees can pay their bills while people like Jeff Reisner don't bother asking questions and already made up their mind. You could have asked to hear our side of the story, but you don't care about us or the fact that most of the food trucks in this town are now gone permanently. It's clear we have every reason to doubt your motivation and sincerity. These are people's lives that we're talking about, and you haven't done anything for them, and now you're trying to hurt them more. You're trying to hurt me and trying to hurt my employees. All is not yet lost. We haven't given up. I recently applied for a variance, but if the mayor appoints people like Jeffrey, it's looking more like a death sentence. And if we don't get approved to vend, me and my employees will be on the streets. This all feels like a money-based popularity contest, and this isn't the time or the place for it. So please show your support for local business and vote no to this harmful ordinance, and consider withdrawing it.
Thank you. Okay.
Sarah Coyle Bryant. I own Cool Digs at 6 Euclid Drive. I'm a small business owner. Changing this code in the midst of the pandemic begs the question of why. Let's consider that and consider that everybody's paying close attention to elected officials and how they treat small businesses. And we expect from a progressive community equal treatment as those larger corporations get. That's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you. Okay, do we have any other, okay.
Howdy, my name's Alex Schwartz. I live at 36 Central, and I'm just here representing myself. I'm just here mostly to support some of my buddies here, and you know, I think we probably all know more people who have had food truck businesses here in town than there are people who currently run food truck businesses here in town. I think in general, you know, I'm just speaking in general terms, that we could take a look at the uptown vending situation, see what we can do better to facilitate businesses up there. Because the majority of the days, the vending spots that are there are left empty, you know, and I think that that's a missed opportunity, you know, for local workers, for local business owners, and people in Athens in general, you know, and that goes all the way down. Like, there's a lot of small businesses that like to support local farms, and, you know, attempting to pay their employees living wages and health insurance and whatnot, and just in general trying to do better. So that'd be my plea, is that we take a look at uptown vending and food trucks in general and just try and do better.
Thank you. Okay. And do we have any other comments from our audience members? Okay, thank you. All right. We'll move on to Ordinance 11521. This is an ordinance amending Athens City Code Title 5, Public Utilities, Chapter 5.02, Garbage and Rubbish, Section 5.02.03, Preparation and Storage. And this is introduced by Councilmember Fall. And if no questions or comments, we'll move on to 11621. This is an ordinance amending Athens City Code Title 13, General Offenses, Chapter 13.07, Miscellaneous Offenses, Section 13.07.07, Citation, introduced by Councilmember Fall. If no questions or comments, We'll move on to 11721. This is an ordinance amending Athens City Code Title 29, Housing Regulations, Chapter 29.12, Premises and Conditions, Section 29.12.02, Citation, introduced by Councilmember Fall. If no questions or comments, we'll move on to 11821. This is an ordinance amending Athens City Code Title I, General Provisions, Chapter 1.03, Code Fees Established, Section 5.06.03 and 29.03.07. This is introduced by Councilmember Fall. And if no questions or comments, we'll move on to ordinance 11921. This is an ordinance amending Athens City Code Title I, General Provisions, Chapter 1.03, Code Fees Established, Sections 5.04.08, Sewer Rates, and declaring an emergency. This is introduced by all members of council. And if no questions or comments on this one, we will move on to ordinance 12021. This is an ordinance amending the 2021 appropriation ordinance and introduced by Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, President Isley. I'd like to make a motion to amend 12021.
Second?
Thank you. We have an additional, some information to change the ordinance. The amendment we would like council to consider is to add $10,000 to Recreation Fund 270, Transaction Code 200 and 300 for vehicle lease payments and other items through the year end. It already has $10,000 in this ordinance for payroll for TC 100, but this would add for TC transaction codes 200 to 300. And the reason for this are that the Arts, Parks, and Recreation Department has not only identified the need for additional funding for their lease payments, but they also had some additional expenses this summer with the swimming pool, including the amount of chlorine that they had to purchase, as well as some expenses with a rec truck, and then this enterprise lease vehicle. So that is the reason for the amendment. Thank you, President Leslie.
Okay. So we have a motion and second for amending this ordinance. Do you have any questions or comments from council members, elected officials, from our audience members? Okay. All right, then we'll have the vote for this amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries, and this ordinance has been amended and read for the first time. Ordinance 12121 is an ordinance authorizing the mayor to execute an agreement with the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, AFSCME, Local 24031, concerning wages and working conditions, and is introduced by the Finance and Personnel Committee. And if no comments or questions, we'll move on to ordinance 12221. This is an ordinance authorizing the mayor to execute an agreement with the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, AFSCME, Local 24032, concerning wages and working conditions, and introduced by the Finance and Personnel Committee. If no questions or comments from administration, elected officials, we'll move on, and audience members. Okay. 12321 is an ordinance providing compensation of greater than 25% through the assigned pay grade pursuant to Ordinance 3521 for the Assistant Director of EPW and authorizing the hourly rate to be paid retroactively to the employee's subsequent rehire date, introduced by Councilmember Crowell. And if no comments or questions on this, we will move on to 12321. 12421. And that is an ordinance amending the 2021 staffing levels authorized by ordinance 14120. This is introduced by Councilmember Crowell. And if no comments or questions on that ordinance, we'll now move on to ordinances for first reading. 12521 is an ordinance amending the 2021 appropriation ordinance and is introduced by Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, President Isley. This ordinance includes one item, which is an appropriation to decrease from the sewer plant fund capital line $39,000 and increasing the transaction code 200-300 line professional services by $39,000 for valve replacement at the wastewater treatment plant. Thank you, President Isley.
Okay. Any comments or questions from council members, elected officials, audience? If not, we'll move on to ordinance 12621. This is an ordinance approving an education incentive program for non-union city employees. Introduced by Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, President Isley. This ordinance approves this new program for non-union employees in the city of Athens. The purpose is to incentivize employees who take the initiative to increase their training, their education, to make them better employees at their jobs. And that obviously makes them more valuable to not only their department, but to the city. Employees would be limited to receiving one educational incentive for a college degree and two educational incentives for professional certifications or licensures. Eligible employees are full-time regular employees that are employed for a continuous period of no less than 1 year. The eligible programs would be, as mentioned, a college degree or professional certifications. The way they would be paid would be an increase to their paycheck, basically, 26 times a year. Their bi-monthly paychecks, roughly bi-monthly paychecks would be increased. This would be administered by the Human Resources Director, working with the individual department heads. And the amounts would be as follows. For an associate's degree, the incentive dollar amount would be $250 per year. That works out to approximately $9.60 per pay period or per paycheck. For a bachelor's degree, it would be $750 per year, which is about $28.85 per paycheck. And if they went on actually to get a master or doctorate degree, that would be up to $1,000 per year, or $38.46 per paycheck. For the professional certifications, if they got one of those, it would be $250 per year, and two would be $500 per year. This is a way to incentivize our employees to stay up to date on their responsibilities and their training for their positions and improve the city. And I'm in support of this program. Thank you, President Leslie.
Okay, thank you. And do we have any comments or questions from council members? Yes, Councilmember Reisner.
Would these educational programs be in addition to the education and training that was required of some of our employees for their positions, such as wastewater licensing or fire department training? Would this be what's mandatory in terms of training, and then this would be optional?
So the program, may I respond to that?
Yeah,
Go-
yes.
Okay.
If it's required for your job, it doesn't count.
Right.
So if I require an associate's degree for people in my office, but they go on to get a bachelor's degree, which would make them, more valuable in my office, they would get it for that, but not for the associate's degree that I require. And same with all the licensure fees for the plants and stuff like that.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Okay. If none from our council members, elected officials, or the audience, we'll move on to ordinance 12721. This is an ordinance approving a merit bonus program for non-union city employees, introduced by Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, President Nysy. I'd like to make a motion to table this ordinance.
That was fast.
Pending additional information from the city administration. And I would also like to read into the record the results of a survey that the city of Athens did, just to make sure we have the correct data on record. The question was asked of city employees, how well does City of Athens recognize my value? And 32% of employees said, I feel I am highly valued. 45% of employees said, I sometimes feel valued. 15% of employees said, I'm not sure others value what I do. And 8% of employees said, I don't feel valued at the City of Athens. Thank you, President Isaac.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion and second to table this item, pending additional details. And do we have any other questions or comments? Yes, Councilmember Ziff.
Thank you, President. I was just wondering, for my own clarity, I can't remember, I think we talked about this in committee last week, but what additional info in particular are we looking for?
We all had asked for other cities that had tried to put together this plan.
Thank you.
And we did get a list, I did get a list of cities, but not any information about how it was going for them.
Gotcha.
So the city administration said they'd look into asking those cities additional questions, so we had more information, and perhaps the auditor can speak to this.
We also, yes, we've gotten some responses to that, but we also reached out to our HR consultants, Clemens Nelson, to get some additional information from them. And that's what we're really waiting for right now.
Thank you.
Yes, Councilmember Smedley.
Thank you, President Isley. The other concerns that I had was ensuring that it was fair and consistent. So if we had any way of collecting a strategy or a method in which that can be as objective as possible, if other cities are doing something, that I would be interested in reviewing that sort of thing. I think that was my main concern, was the possible subjectivity of it and the perception that it wasn't done in a fair way, just being very transparent in how we're tracking who's worthy of a bonus and who's not.
What we already have in place, there was a lot of information put out last week, but is an evaluation that all the supervisors would use and that they would be trained on by our HR director. So we have that in place, but that's also additional information on that is something we'll ask for from Clemens Nelson. They, our representative there just said he was too busy last week and he would get with us this week because the HR director wanted to ask him about some other information regarding our staffing and our compensation plan. So they need to set up, I don't know, maybe they already have a time where they can really talk and go through all of these things that we are kind of putting on hold.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to, we need to vote on tabling, excuse me. Lest I move on too fast, we have a motion and second. All those in favor of tabling ordinance 12721, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Okay, this ordinance has been tabled. 12821 is an ordinance authorizing the auditor to reduce the 2021 year-end appropriations and is introduced by Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, President Isley. I'll just go ahead and read section 1 of this ordinance. The auditor is hereby authorized to reduce the 2021 appropriations where anticipated receipts are not adequate and, when combined with the carry forward balance, not sufficient to approve the full appropriation of funds. Thank you, President Nisley.
Okay. Any questions or comments? If none, we'll move on to ordinance 12921. This is an ordinance amending ordinance 6621, authorizing a contract for right-of-way acquisition services for the West Union Street Improvements Project, number 322, and is introduced by Councilmember Reisner.
Thank you, Madam President. Being the first reading, I'll read it first. An ordinance amending ordinance 6621, authorizing a contract for right-of-way acquisition services for the West Union Street Improvement Project, number 322. Section 1, an ordinance amending sections 2 and 3 to read as follows. Section 2, the 2021 appropriation ordinance 140-20 is hereby amended by appropriating from the unappropriated balance the sum of $300,000 to Street Fund 220, Transaction Code 500, and increasing the total appropriations by said amount. Section 3, the Service Safety Director is hereby authorized to expend up to $300,000 from Street Fund 220, Transaction Code 500, for said services. This ordinance shall be in effect in full force upon its passage and approval by the mayor.
Okay. Any questions? Comments? We'll move on to 13021. This is an ordinance authorizing design engineering services for the Armitage Road Bikeway Spur Slip Repair, project number 348, introduced by Councilmember Reisner.
Thank you, Madam President. The ordinance reads as follows. An ordinance authorizing design engineering services for the Armitage Road Bikeway Spur Slip Repair, project number 348. Section 1, the Service Safety Director is hereby authorized to enter into contract for design engineering services for the Armitage Road Bikeway Spur Slip Repair, project number 348. Section 2, the 2021 appropriation ordinance 140-20 is hereby amended by appropriating from the unappropriated balance the sum of $20,000 to Street Fund 220, Transaction Code 500, and increasing the total appropriations by said amount. This ordinance shall be in effect and full force upon its passage and approval by the mayor.
Okay, thank you. Questions or comments? If none, we'll move on to 13121. This is an ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into an LPA state project agreement with the Ohio Department of Transportation for new pavement and guardrail replacement on Stimson Avenue and declaring an emergency. Introduced by Councilmember Reisner.
Thank you, Madam President. Unlike the other ordinances, this one's about 5 pages long because of all the boilerplate. It's on our drive if anyone wants to peruse it. But essentially, everything, as you just mentioned in the title, is covered. So
Okay.
that's what it is.
Fixing a section of Stimson. Okay. Any comments or questions? If none, we'll move on now to ordinance 13221, an ordinance granting a special right-of-way use permit to Michelle Jennings, owner of 28 South May Avenue, to construct a privacy fence. This is introduced by Councilmember Fall.
Thank you. We talked about this. It's a fairly straightforward right-of-way license. We do these by going in the first one when it's established, goes through council. After 10 years, it is administratively renewed unless there's some type of problem and the city council doesn't like it, it can come back to council. Why do we do right-of-way? Well, right-of-ways, the city has, it's important to have right-of-ways because this is where we do things like put parking meters or streets or sidewalks, and sometimes people would like to do something in that right-of-way, put a fence, put a sign, and it's just good for us to be able to know what's going on with our right-of-way because in the future we may have to use that right-of-way to expand a road, and then we know what's going on with it before that, and it helps us make better decisions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any comments or questions? If none from council members or elected officials or audience, we'll move on to 13321. This is an ordinance amending Athens City Code Title 23, Zoning Code, Chapter 23.08, Off-Street Parking and Loading, Unloading Regulations, and Chapter 23.10, definitions, Table B, off-street parking requirements, and is introduced by Councilmember Fall.
Thank you. This is not the first time people have heard of this. This particular ordinance is updating our off-street parking requirements. These are the requirements people have when they build a business or rentals or any of those other things of off-street parking. We have worked with our other areas of parking. We've done a lot with Uptown, looking at using the parking lot more efficiently. It's gotten a lot better. We've looked at on-street parking. We have a 72-hour permit now, so that helps with the issues of walking the car. And this is the last leg of the stool that makes parking in Athens. I want to read the whereases. I won't read the whole, 18 pages, but it says, whereas City Council Resolution 1021 requests that the City Planning Commission consider amending the off-street parking regulations and requirements. That was the first time this ordinance was heard, when it was a resolution that was read at council, talked about in a committee meeting, and then voted on by council. So the Planning Commission got it. The Planning says, whereas the Athens City Planning Commission voted 5-0 to recommend amending chapters 23.08 and 23.10 with modifications to the resolution. That's what we were looking at tonight. Said recommendations is consistent with Athens 2040 Comprehensive Plan, which the City Council has adopted. It's also been informed by many of our other plans, such as the sustainability plan, the pedestrian and bicycle plan that we have, the safe routes to school issues, and this complete streets policy that the council has also adopted. So it's been well-researched. It's been through the Planning Commission process, which was more than 90 days of having it on the Planning Commission's agenda. They also had a public hearing about it. And now it will go through the committee meeting, which it did a couple weeks ago, and now for first reading. So the last time our parking ordinance, this particular one, was updated was 2004. That's a long time. And many, many, many things have changed in Athens since then. So basically what this does is update, especially Table B, which is all the numbers that go along with your type of development. Those have all been updated to best management practices of what other cities and planning commissions have done. It also puts in some language to where businesses can share lots, which is something right now that churches can do on Sunday, where they have a joint use with other parking lots around them so that they can have their events on Sunday. So it's already worked well in that case. So that expands it. And then it has exceptions, which I think is the meat of most of this. Because we've talked a lot about affordable housing, about sustainability, about Uptown becoming more viable, about business development, and about affordable housing. Oh, I think I said that twice. Sorry. It is important. So one of the things that we have as a city and has a bigger impact than it really should be is our parking requirements. And so what we want to do, and what we have tried to do through various other things that we've done as council and the administration, is to try to address our housing needs via, we did a TIF for some of the universal housing. We've annexed property so that we can have development area for other types of moderate or low-income housing, such as out on by Armitage Road. So those are all ways that we can do it. Parking is another way. So we have an exceptions, which is 23.08.6. And basically, this reduces the amount of parking that these particular types of projects would have to find in Table B. And it would be up to 50%. So Low-income housing tax credit projects would be, could be part of that exception. Replacing one vehicle parking for every 4 bicycle parking spaces as for Table D, and that may account for up to 25% of the maximum parking space reduction allowed. You can also have designated downtown redevelopment districts, which is something that we've done out on West Union and where the Cider House is. Great program, lots of money with that one from the state. Special improvement districts, opportunity zones, or innovation zones. And then owner-occupied duplex, infill, or rental conversion. Rental must have had a valid rental permit for 3 of the last 5 years. So what's this saying? If you go in and try to convert a multi-unit rental, say the one next door to me, into maybe a duplex, which is I'm living in one side and I can rent the other side, I wouldn't necessarily have to put the amount of parking in, especially if there was the conversion, the permit was for 3 of the past 5 years. So that's something that we've been talking about a lot in the neighborhoods, is how do you get conversion of rentals that may not be rented as much anymore. A couple of our neighbors haven't been able to rent their rentals out. And that's important to get more stock in the housing stock and different types of housing stock. And then, as I said, the Table B has been updated. There's also exceptions for development sites in R3, B2, B2D, B3, and M zones that are within 1,500 feet of an existing public transit service stop. And that is somebody says, what happens if our bus goes away? Well, this exception would go away. If downtown redevelopment zone districts went away as a state program, that exception goes away. There's B2D Uptown Business Zone with 1 and 2 bedroom housing units, something that has been shown over and over through the Economic Development Commission has been telling us this. The planner and other is that we need 1 and 2 bedroom housing units. Residential tax increment financing project, developments with at least 50% universal design, housing with net zero or LEED certification. So these are all things that we want to encourage because we have been told over and over again that sustainability is important, that increasing the availability of different types of housing is important, making the best use of our land that we have so not very much flat land, and making sure that it can be used in ways that help the community and also the property owner. So that's basically it in a nutshell.
Okay. And we have a couple of comments from council members.
We will also have a public hearing on November 22nd.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So I
Okay.
think Councilmember Smedley and then Councilmember McCary had some comments. Yes.
Thank you, President Nisley, Member Fall. I have a mix of comments and questions about this particular ordinance. Last I spoke on this, I said I needed to watch the last Planning Commission meeting, which I did, and it was very helpful walking folks through the changes and the justification for those changes. And first off, I wanted to express appreciation to those volunteer members of the Planning Commission. They do dedicate a lot of time on some pretty complex issues, and I appreciate their time and effort. Based on what I heard and what I read before us tonight, it has addressed a number of the concerns that I've heard from West Siders in particular. There has been suggestion that we revisit the process that we've been through for this particular ordinance, perhaps asking that we have an ad hoc committee be created. But I feel confident in the process that we have gone through. It has gone through council, back to Planning Commission, public hearing, back to Planning Commission, now back to council, then we'll have another public hearing. So I feel like we have a number of opportunities for the public to be heard. Changes have been made based on feedback from the public. And a number of other comments that I made related to the motive behind this particular ordinance comes from a lot of plans that have been put forth already that Member Fall mentioned. We want to be a pedestrian-friendly city and want to encourage alternatives to vehicles, which I think a number of us would support for a number of reasons. My comments to that previously were about the limitations that exist in our transit system. And we have a very robust transit system for a rural community, but there are some gaps. Realizing that that shouldn't necessarily stop this ordinance from going through, but recognizing this is a part of a bigger plan, right? So we'll continue to look at our transit, continue to look for ways to support it. My other comment was about our sidewalks. We're trying to encourage more pedestrian-friendly communities, and I feel like we can do more now. And again, that's not necessarily to stop this ordinance from going forward. Simultaneously, I think we need to be more proactive about the condition of our sidewalks so that we can create ordinances like this that make it more of a pedestrian-friendly environment, and also create an actual more pedestrian environment where we have a safe passage on the sidewalks. So I would ask that, so I would simply ask that that maybe administration come forward with some plans on how we can better enforce our current laws that improve sidewalks. A few questions. We talked about how this particular plan was justified by two factors: decrease in a decrease in demand in vehicles. If we can get some more information on where that's coming from, I'd like to know that. And also, it was suggested that relieving the burdensome parking requirements would also decrease rents. And I'd like to see that evidence somewhere. I know that was suggested. I would like to just see that somewhere. Lastly, the one issue that I have with the ordinance, and perhaps someone can give me some more context on it. In order to get the exemption, if you are, correct if I'm wrong, if it's a rental, the landlord can conduct the study, so that's a self-study situation.
Oh, you mean in the, that if there's an excess parking spaces, that they can be made into, can be converted to other uses. A majority of that will occur hopefully on East State Street, because those parking lots are huge. It's not going to occur very much on the smaller developments around here, because they have, they're going to find the right level of parking, and most of them are going to feel that they're okay with that level. This is definitely for much larger spot. Those are companies that specialize in management and these sort of things. This is not an unusual requirement to go in order to convert the property from parking into something else. Does that help?
I think so.
Yeah. So, like Lowe's, Lowe's has okay, but Walmart has a huge parking lot. And what do they use it for? Well, it's used for semi-parking and things, and it's in rotten shape. And they may find that it's beneficial to do something with it, and then they would have to fulfill these requirements.
But then it goes back to like
It
the
would
city
be-
safety service director to then confirm. Correct?
Yes.
There's like a layer of the city
Yes.
administrator. Gotcha.
Yeah,
Okay.
and if somebody tried to do a study that was not very good and sent it to our safety service director, they would know. We have robust people who would be looking this over.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember McCary.
Thanks. I have a few questions, and I think the first one is probably the simplest. I am curious about the parking spot sizes, because I find it difficult to visually understand what I've heard previously, which is that our parking spots in Athens are larger than they need to be, and that that vehicles are not getting bigger, so we can have smaller. And it's just not my perception of vehicles getting smaller, and I don't have the kind of visual memory that can compare sizes of parking spots. So I'm wondering if we can clarify a little bit more of the rationale for making parking spots smaller.
A lot of it is what other communities have done. as put forward by best management practices, are mostly, you have a certain size, and like the code director was saying, it has to be a certain size so you can have turning radius and stuff. But ours is bigger than you need to have that. And so if you reduce it, that helps to keep green space, because we also have a green space requirement for, for commercial development, and like R3s, you need to have a certain amount of green space still, even after your parking. So that helps balance it. On East State Street, we had fat lanes. And when we did East State Street, we narrowed the lanes, because that's what people find works the best to do to fulfill all the objectives of safety and accessibility, speed limit and those sort of things. It's kind of the same idea as that things are smaller, and cars are actually getting smaller. And so you don't need as much cement, is basically it. Now, it's an upper level. It's how they do it is, how did they do it? It has to be a base of 150 square feet. But if you needed something really big, that would be required. You could do it if you needed something bigger, but it can't be smaller than 150 square feet instead of 180 square feet, so.
Okay. I think I should clarify and ask, is there a particular source that helps people understand that cars are getting smaller, or vehicles are getting smaller? Because I imagine that's pretty nuanced.
Right. I can.
Thank you. I would appreciate that. And my second is about appreciating the process that this has gone through, back and forth between Planning Commission and Council. I appreciate that provided lots of opportunities for input, and I want to make sure that we understand what some of the primary concerns have been, some of which may have been addressed through changes, but even the basic question of who might be most inconvenienced by these changes, especially with regard to parking.
Parking, yeah. I don't know, I guess there was concern with the distance of around the exceptions. I think that people were concerned about the exceptions was too great of a distance, like from the transit stop and those sort of things. So those were reduced, and some of the other exceptions were changed. I think that people are concerned about the spots in the front of their house. And we have made it, that was the other leg of the stool with the 72-hour permit that helps to address those issues. Just from my point of view, I live, in the near neighborhood area, and there's been less on-street parking over the years. And whether that's because people are living closer in, they don't drive as much, there's less people at school, those sort of things. So we may find that it's not really as much of an issue.
Okay, thanks.
Does that make sense?
My third question is about the proposed idea of having a work group give this further consideration. I was hoping to get some clarification on how council approaches the decision to establish work groups versus task forces versus ad hoc groups. And I've been made aware of the concern that these can sometimes be used just to hold up processes or send something to committee to die. So I am looking for commentary on, is there a difference between a work group? A task force and ad hoc committee, do they last indefinitely? And is there any particular comment you can make about why it wouldn't be helpful to have one now?
Well, in the past, we, as council, right, we can establish an ad hoc, which is given like a set task. Task force are similar. Like the comprehensive plan had a ad hoc task force associated with it.
And the affordable housing
And the
had
yeah.
an earlier study that ended up lasting, I think
Yeah.
it was a joint project that lasted over 2 years and came forward with some recommendations. So it can be.
That was for a
it's
whole plan.
It's varied.
Yeah.
If I could jump in, I would say that a difference that I've noticed is there was a task force or an ad hoc, I don't remember what it was called, but a group created to look at on-street vending a few years ago. There was the Affordable Housing Task Force. They were groups set up to specifically look at an issue that the city did not already have a process for really thoroughly reviewing. And in this case, we have a process. This is something that has been talked about with in multiple venues. It is part of the comprehensive plan, and then the Planning Commission has very carefully and thoroughly reviewed it and had opportunity for public input. And so I would say that's a difference that I've noticed. Like, we didn't have a venue through which to really analyze and discuss and get participation on affordable housing or on food truck vending, whereas we do on this particular process. So.
Thank you, that's helpful. Just to clarify, so that means because we already have a planning commission that can work through this sort of thing, that means it would be, if we had anything, more appropriate for there to be a task force rather than ad hoc. Am I understanding the distinction correctly, or is there a distinction?
I don't know that there's a formal distinction
Okay.
in city
Okay.
administration or with
Then I
our city council.
I think that's my last question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Yes, Councilmember Crowe.
Thank you, President Isley. Member Fall, I'd like you to address a specific argument that I've heard in my neighborhood, which is connected to things that Member McCary has said and that you yourself have said about, we're worried about the parking right in front of our house. This argument goes that students in Athens, Ohio, at Ohio University will continue to bring cars to Athens. If we reduce the parking for the housing that students live in, then those cars have to go somewhere. And the fear is that they will go in front of my house and that I won't have space to park my car. And this was a problem in the city of Athens a few decades ago before we instituted the 24-hour parking rule. But can you just address that argument?
Well, that's one of the because parking has to be looked at as a whole suite of types of parking, and something that an ad hoc committee, I think, was with the 72-hour. So that helps right there, that you can get a permit for 72-hour. The neighborhoods, and your neighborhood, is, you know, the certain neighborhoods don't have very much pressure from students. You know, we're talking about certain neighborhoods, not Jeff's neighborhood, you know, probably not as much in yours, definitely on the west and in mine. That 72-hour helps. Constitutionally, nobody is like guaranteed a spot right in front of your house, you know, sort of thing. My street, every spot is in front of my house and the house across the street because they can't park on their side. So there you already have, you know, if you're going to fight about spots. And I think that when you look at this, hopefully, you know, people would be able to update it more regularly than however many years from 2004. These plans, and like our comprehensive plan, is written to look 20 years. What do we want to look like in 20 years? And that was the same thing as like the East State Street project, was that people were concerned that we put bicycle gutters, is what people call them, and wider sidewalks. And they were worried about that. And I think that it's shown that it works. It hasn't stopped East State Street from functioning. And in 15 years, it's going to look even better because a lot more people are going to be riding bikes and stuff. That's already happening with all the e-bikes and everything. So I think as we go on and looking at it from a sustainability part, is that, yeah, we will be having less problems than we are presently, which is less problems than we had 10 years ago with this sort of issue.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions or comments? From council members, elected officials, audience members? All right, if not, thanks. Yes, Councilmember Burris.
Just, I think the fact that unless someone gets a 72-hour parking permit, there is still a 24-hour parking restriction in place, and so that really prevents that storage parking solution. Someone who lives very close to campus is not going to want to have to walk halfway across town in order to move their car every 24 hours. So I think that that issue is really addressed through the 24 and 72-hour parking restrictions.
All right, we'll move on to ordinance 13421. This is an ordinance amending certain sections of Athens City Code, Title 7, Traffic, and repealing all ordinances inconsistent therewith, introduced by Councilmember Grace.
Thank you, President Nisley. We've had a few members this evening talking about not reading the whole ordinance, but I thought I would just read all 50-some pages of this one. Not really. I will read the whereases. This is the 55-page ordinance that our city law director and staff and our clerk of council really put a great deal of effort into. And the whereases say that whereas the duly elected governing authority of the city of Athens, Ohio, is authorized by Ohio Revised Code 715.01 to adopt ordinances relating to the property and affairs of local government. And whereas certain changes in state statutes require an update of the city's traffic regulations to ensure that they correspond with and do not conflict with state statutes regarding the same or similar topics. So that really succinctly outlines what is done by the following 54 and a half pages, which is to align our local traffic code to the state code. And I won't keep reading all 54 pages.
Thank you. Yes, Councilmember Fall.
I want to say thank you to everybody, especially the law director. I know that this has been a long-term goal of doing yours, and thank you for it's big.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? All right. Seeing none. Ordinance 13521 is an ordinance amending certain sections of Athens City Code, Title 13, General Offenses, and repealing all ordinances inconsistent therewith, introduced by Councilmember Grace.
Thank you, President Nisley. And this ordinance is slightly shorter at 24 pages, but it does the same thing as the previous ordinance, except it is amending Athens City Code Title 13, which is general offenses, whereas the previous ordinance was addressing the traffic code.
Okay. Questions or comments? I'd just like to second the thanks for all the work, Law Director Eliason. It's been a long progress.
Member Reisner had a question about how much it was going to cost to codify, and
Yes.
I think the clerk may have provided that information. How much is it?
$2,000.
$2,000 to codify it.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Maybe we should explain why it would cost that much, about where we print it, why it would cost.
I'm not really familiar with why the cost
Well,
would
I
be
mean,
2,000. I mean, we do,
you give.
Muni Code
Our
is
code
a-
online is run by Muni Code, which is a organization, corporation, I don't know. But when we go to update things and put new ordinances in, we pay a per page charge. And then they keep it updated, you can search it and print it out and all sorts of stuff.
So it's a worthwhile investment, I think, is what we're saying too, because it's available then to the public and to all of us to be able to research it, so, yeah.
Can we do a GoFundMe to pay for this?
Give you $1.
I need to. Okay,
Sorry.
thanks for the comments. Yeah. All right, 13621 is an ordinance amending Ordinance 4117 to include a biodiversity conservation plan as part of the Athens Sustainability Action Plan, introduced by all members of council, but I think specifically Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, President
Like to speak
Isley.
to
I'd like to read this ordinance. Whereas the city supports residents who want to provide habitat on their property for pollinators, birds, native plants, and other wildlife. And whereas local officials effectively work to reduce threats like invasive species and pollution. And whereas the City of Athens commits to being a good steward of our rich natural heritage, making sure that healthy habitats are preserved, developed, and restored for the benefit of native flora, fauna, current residents, and future generations. Be it ordained by the Council of the City of Athens, Ohio, Section 1, Ordinance 41-17 is hereby amended to include a biodiversity conservation plan as part of the Athens Sustainability Action Plan, a copy of which is attached hereto and incorporated herein by reference. We had an excellent presentation on this recommended addition to the Athens Sustainability Plan at committee meeting last week. And we have the full plan, not quite as long as Member Grace's sections, but a good 12 pages, just over 12 pages. And I just want to outline the major portions of this plan. Priority 1 in the new section is to assess. As with any good sustainability assessment, we need to know what we have. So priority 1 assess is the city will work with local organizations to document and map habitat types and conduct bio-inventories of plant and animal life throughout the city, its parks and waterways. Priority 2 is to identify threats and challenges to biodiversity. For example, pesticide use and invasive species, as mentioned, Sustainability Commission, who's in the audience tonight, Amy Delac, as well as Environment and Sustainability Commission member Stefan Gleisberg for their work on this section, this biodiversity plan for the Sustainability Plan. There are also numerous other members of the Environment and Sustainability Commission who helped Ms. Delac and Mr. Gleisberg with this, including Elaine Getz and Sarah Conley-Ballou and Jasmine Fakoun. Ms. Delac also did a good job of contacting others in our rich community of experts, including at Ohio University in the biology and plant biology departments, as well as Ann Bonner of the Ohio Department of Natural Resources and Joe Brem of Rural Action. Thank you, President Isley.
Okay, thank you for the summary. And do we have any comments or questions from our council members, elected officials, members of the audience? Yes. Chairperson Delac.
Hi, thank you. My name is Amy Delac. I live on Morris Avenue, and I am the chair of the Athens Environment and Sustainability Commission and the lead author of the Biodiversity Action Plan. I just want to really express my gratitude to council for taking this up. And I want to invite any audience members who have more questions about the plan or about the work of our commission to attend our meeting. The next one is Wednesday night in these chambers, as Member Crowell announced, 6 p.m. And we would be happy to give you a copy of the plan and answer any questions anyone has. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. We'll move on to announcements and other business. The first being that next week we will have a special session. That means we will be reading the ordinances as well as having our committee meeting. And Council Member Crowell, yes, I think you have an
Thank you. In connection to some other business that we've discussed at council previously, we had a D3 liquor permit that was presented to us by the Department of Liquor Control for a local establishment called Boozy Bubbles. As I expressed at committee meeting, I was curious about this liquor permit proposal because of the nature of the establishment. It is an establishment that sells a tea drink with bubbles, with tapioca bubbles. I wasn't sure if the tapioca counted as a food item, which is necessary to have this. I wasn't sure what else, although Member Ziff helped us out with what else was for sale at this establishment. This establishment shares a space on Court Street with another business that does sell food. And I just had a lot of questions about what our role was in receiving this permit. And so I had some conversations with the law director, and we contacted each of us, the Division of Liquor Control, because I wanted more information. And the information that I got from the Division of Liquor Control indicated that there would be 2 inspections of the business, an initial inspection, which they believed had already happened, and then a final inspection once the business had submitted all the additional paperwork, and that they had notified the Division of Liquor Control that they had satisfied all the requirements and they were ready for that final inspection. In terms of what they are allowed to do in terms of food, they can't just say that they would provide catered food, was one of our questions, but they do actually have to have that food on site. It can be produced off site, but it has to be there at all times that they are open, in terms of being able to also serve this item with liquor in it. So I just wanted to let council know that I had talked about at the committee meeting that I might request a review. Member Reisner, Member Fall, who were on council the last time this happened, provided some valuable information for me. Now that I know that the Division of Liquor Control has a process that they will evaluate this business to make sure it falls under the appropriate business to be able to have this item, I have no objection. So I'm not objecting, I'm not calling for a review based on incidents on Court Street like previously or any other issue. I am satisfied that the Division of Liquor Control will do their job in this situation. Thank you, President Eisen.
Thank you. Thanks for the update. Councilmember Ziff.
Thank you, President Isley. Actually, on the same note, Member Crowell, I actually had the opportunity to talk to an employee of that business while I was at work the other day. And I was like, oh, you work here. Can you tell me anything about what's going to be happening with this? And maybe we should reach out to the actual business owner at some point and get information directly from them. But what I heard from the employee, at least, was that their intention was to sell liquor at the Columbus branch. And then if they were to actually attempt to sell alcohol at the Court Street location, they would actually move to a separate location on Court, is what I was told by the employee, which seems a little odd that they would have this whole request going on. But maybe there's some kind of miscommunication or something, but that would make a lot more sense, trying to sell something in a place that isn't 2 restaurants. But yeah, just more info, I guess.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other announcements? Okay. We do have a separate time at the end of each of our council meetings where if someone from the public would like to discuss or speak, and the topics that they can speak on are legislative items or city services that have not been covered on the agenda. Is there anyone in the audience wanting to speak to these items, the legislative items or city services not on the agenda? If not, we'll have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. We are adjourned at